Usually when we talk about nostalgia, we expect it to be comforting, right? Like a warm, golden-hued filter over our past, where the rough edges just kind of get sanded down by time. But then, you encounter a memory that utterly refuses to play by those rules. Imagine you're driving to work on a totally mundane Tuesday, and you catch a fleeting glimpse of a red-haired girl standing on the corner. For half a choking moment, your heart literally stops. Your brain tries to bridge a gap of decades, but reality sets in. She's holding a cigarette and she's wearing a Sex Pistols t-shirt, which is the ultimate dead giveaway, because the girl from your past absolutely hated the Sex Pistols. Yet the ghost of her still lingers, totally shattering that comforting illusion of the past. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to dive deep into August 1986 and explore this visceral, haunting kind of nostalgia. Okay, let's dive into this. We're deconstructing the opening chapters of Rainbow Rowell's novel, Eleanor Park. We'll be looking at the high-stakes ecosystem, armor and invisibility, weaponized weirdness, the illusion of sanctuary, and finally, the shared lifeline.
So, Part 1, the high-stakes ecosystem.
To really understand the haunting loss at the core of this story, we can't start with romance. No, we have to start at the ultimate proving ground for high school social dynamics, the morning school bus. Now, to an adult, the physical stakes here might seem low, but for a teenager, the psychological stakes are absolutely stratospheric. The bus isn't just a vehicle, it's a cage with a predator. And the predator ruling the back of this cage is a kid named Steve, who enforces his dominance with this terrifying dictator-like logic. Survival here comes down to a few critical rules. Step 1, never, ever contradict his absurd power plays. Like right now, he's screaming about the lethal capabilities of drunken monkey karate. Step 2, you absolutely must suppress all laughter. Even though it's completely ridiculous, nobody laughs. And why? Because of Step 3. Everyone remembers the disproportionate retribution. You see, someone once made a standard, dumb teenage joke that Steve and his tiny girlfriend Tina's babies would bust out of her stomach like the monster in the movie Aliens. Steve didn't just yell at him, he broke the kid's little finger on his own face. It's a brutal ecosystem governed by the constant looming threat of violence.
Moving right along to Section 2, Armor and Invisibility.
This terrifying environment brings us to our first protagonist, Park. He's a Korean-American kid whose entire morning strategy relies on one single tactic: total invisibility. He just wants to keep his head down, ignore the casual racism, and basically survive the daily gauntlet. To achieve this invisibility, Park weaponizes his 1986 Walkman. And we really have to remember how revolutionary this device was at the time. It was the very first time in human history you could take a private, customizable soundscape and carry it directly into a hostile public space. Park is literally building a fortress out of sound, blasting XTC and mentally planning to use Skinny Puppy or the Misfits later in the week just to drown out the noise of the bus. But this delicate camouflage is completely disrupted when a new girl, Eleanor, steps onto the bus. She's big, she's awkward, and nobody will let her sit down. The entire bus unites in this classic scapegoat mechanism. When Park finally scoots over to give her a seat, he doesn't do it as some knight in shining armor. Actually, he curses at her under his breath. He is paralyzed by severe internal conflict. On one shoulder, he hears his Korean grandmother's voice, demanding traditional manners and empathy for an outcast down on her luck. But on the other shoulder is his father's voice, a hyper-masculine, martial arts-obsessed guy who views giving up the seat to weakness as a complete failure. So Park gives her the seat, but he is furious about drawing any attention to himself.
Which brings us to Section 3, Weaponized Weirdness.
Let's shift the perspective over to Eleanor for a second. If Park views her as a magnet for trouble who doesn't realize what a mess she is, Eleanor's internal monologue reveals she is actually acutely aware of exactly how dangerous the situation is. I mean, she literally refers to this commute as Bus 666. She looks at these kids as devils, even spotting the literal horns hidden in the feathered bangs of girls like Steve's girlfriend, Tina. Now, what's really interesting about this is how completely her survival tactics contrast with Park's. Park's defense is all about invisibility and camouflage, right? Hiding behind his headphones. Eleanor's defense is the exact opposite. She adopts this porcupine aesthetic. She knows she's never going to blend in or be the tiny girl with feathered bangs, so she actively utilizes weaponized weirdness. By wearing oversized men's plaid shirts, a half-dozen strange necklaces, and unpredictable scarves around her wrists, she makes herself deliberately uncategorizable. If society's going to judge her, she aggressively rejects their standards so they literally can't judge her by normal metrics. We see the raw power of this defiant armor in an excruciating English class scene later that same day. The teacher makes Eleanor stand up and read out loud on her very first day. The kids behind Park are whispering, cruelly calling her a fat chippette. And the poem she is forced to read is Emily Dickinson's I Had Been Hungry All the Years. It's a nightmare scenario, but Eleanor, She doesn't cringe. She reads it not with embarrassment, but with the cool, defiant dignity of an absolute queen.
The choice of this specific poem by the author is just brilliant. The snickering teenagers assume it's a cruel joke about literal hunger, but the poem is actually about the starvation of the soul. It's about looking through windows at a warmth and wealth you can't ever hope to own. Eleanor is emotionally, socially, and physically starved for safety, yet she absolutely refuses to give them the satisfaction of seeing her starve. And this metaphorical starvation sets up a gut-wrenching transition from the public battlefield of the school directly into the devastating reality of her private life.
That leads us into Section 4, the illusion of sanctuary. You'd expect a reprieve after a hard day at school, right? A place to finally take off that porcupine armor. But for Eleanor, stepping through her front door is when the real danger begins. Her home life is overshadowed by the terrifying presence of her abusive stepdad, Richie, who had actually kicked her out of the house a full year prior. The environment Richie controls is what Eleanor describes as a cave troll house. It's a study in the claustrophobic architecture of poverty and neglect. There are just 5 dingy rooms. There are 5 children, including Mouse, Ben, Maisie, and a 2-year-old baby, and they're all sleeping on floors. The bathroom is literally attached to the kitchen, with nothing but a flowered sheet serving as a door between the toilet and the refrigerator. When Eleanor walks in, she finds her sister Maisie sitting on Richie's lap, a sight that makes her want to physically throw up.
The text draws this cruel, stark contrast between Eleanor and her mother to really drive home the hopelessness of this environment. Her mother is described as statuesque, beautiful, like a Viking queen carved into the prow of a ship. But paired with this extreme beauty is an absolute submissiveness to Richie. She is aesthetically powerful but functionally powerless. Eleanor, on the other hand, describes herself as looking like she runs a medieval pub. This contrast reinforces Eleanor's darkest core belief. If her flawlessly beautiful mother cannot secure safety or protection from male violence, then Eleanor has absolutely zero chance. She is entirely on her own, and she is uniquely unsafe.
This lack of safety and the complete erasure of her identity is perfectly symbolized by a black garbage bag in her tiny bedroom. See, when Richie kicked her out, he threw all her belongings away. Her mother salvaged just this one bag of her life, kept in a Minnesota uncle's grapefruit box that smells of Chanel No. 5. Inside are the artifacts of a stolen childhood. Some paper dolls, a copy of Watership Down that survived, though her copy of Garp didn't make it, some Prismacolor markers, some stationery, and most tragically, a Walkman with no batteries.
And finally, Section 5, the shared lifeline. This dead piece of technology brings us to the climax of our explainer, focusing on the physical objects that ultimately bridge the gap between these 2 isolated teenagers and offer a way out of the darkness. So the crucial point is comparing these 2 devices. On one side, we have Park, who owns a functioning Walkman. For him, it's a shield, a fortress of chosen silence that he uses to protect himself against the toxic ecosystem of the bus. On the other side, we have Eleanor, whose dead Walkman represents a severed lifeline. Because she can't even afford the batteries to make it work, she is left totally defenseless. She's forced to sit in the silence of her domestic trauma, entirely unable to tune out Richie's voice in her own home.
And initially, Park actually uses his functioning technology as a weapon against her. When they first sit together, Park turns his music all the way up to rigorously enforce a rigid 6-inch gap on that green vinyl bus seat. He uses the audio to completely shut her out and maintain his isolation across that tiny physical divide.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the core visual metaphor of the book, which is actually depicted right on the novel's cover. The cover shows a single, continuous headphone wire looping from the boy's ear into the red-headed girl's ear. It's a closed visual circuit. For this connection to happen, it requires Park to take off half of his carefully constructed armor and physically hand it over to the outcast who is drawing all the fire. And this brilliantly illustrates the bridging power of music. By sharing the headphones, it transforms the very tool Park used for isolation into a shared language. It demands physical proximity. They are tethered together across that 6-inch gap, creating a literal physical microenvironment of empathy and safety right in the absolute middle of a war zone. It takes the weapon he used to ignore her and turns it into the very lifeline she desperately needed. But understanding this physical connection in 1986 leaves us with a broader implication for today. To invite someone into your safe space back then, you had to physically sit within 3 feet of them. You couldn't just text a Spotify link from across the room. The technology demanded friction and shared vulnerability. Today, we have infinite access to music, but we all wear wireless earbuds existing in our own flawless, untethered algorithmic bubbles. Which leaves us with a staggering question.
Have modern wireless earbuds destroyed the physical friction and proximity required for true human connection? Without that wire forcing us to sit shoulder to shoulder with the weird, complicated people we'd rather ignore, have we lost the very mechanism that allows them to break through our armor in the first place? Thank you for exploring this with me today, and keep that question in mind the next time you put your headphones in.